The Haunting of El Monte. A terrifying encounter with a witch. My name is Jacinto. I want to tell this story. It happened to me many years ago, on one occasion when I went to visit my grandparents' ranch, very close to the city of Puebla. At that time, I was 20 years old. For the same reason, as I was already old, it was the first time I went alone. When the bus arrived to the city, it would be about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Then I would get on a truck, which for 2 hours passed through several towns and rancher, as I would have to get off at one of them and walk about 15 minutes to my grandparents' ranch. That was the way. To my bad luck, a strong storm started. It delayed the departure of the truck for about 3 hours. It quickly became night. Besides, the road became impassable. Even so, at about 7 o'clock the truck left. After half an hour, the road was more difficult. The mud made the truck skid. The driver commented that he could not go any further, stopping at a rancher, where I was going to get off, leaving me quite far from my grandparents' ranch. I had never visited that place, so I did not know anyone. In the truck, there were only 3 passengers. As we did not know how long we would be there, we got off. Everything was quite dark. Where we arrived was a store. The place looked very old. I say this with all due respect, only lit with candles because there was no electricity. On the walls, there were several old pictures, as well as other decorations. There were 2 rustic square tables with 4 chairs each, all made of wood. I remember that it smelled very damp. The person who served us was an elderly person, so as it was customary at that time and in those places, we greeted him respectfully, shaking his hand. He kindly offered us a cup of coffee because we could already feel the cold. After chatting for a while, I learned that he knew my grandfather, that he had been in that place many times, especially remembering the night the witch appeared to them. I was a little surprised because my grandfather had never told me about it. When he saw my reaction, he asked me if I didn't know, and I told him no, that he should tell me. When he heard that, the other people also came closer to listen. He started saying that it had happened about 3 years ago. It was on an occasion when he was drinking with my grandfather there at his ranch. At about 10 o'clock at night, the dogs started barking very loudly and insistently. They thought it could be a dangerous animal, or maybe coyotes that were constantly coming to try to eat the chickens. The man told us that maybe we didn't know, but dogs bark in different ways, depending on the situation they perceive. On that occasion, they sounded as if they sensed some kind of danger. When he looked out the window, he realized that the dogs were barking up the store. He took his carbine and went out to see. When he turned up, there was a totally black figure, like a shadow standing on the roof. It was not a man. It was something sinister. He felt fear because it was very big. Despite the darkness, he could see the brightness of his eyes. He had never seen anything like that. He could not move because of the fright until my grandfather came out. When he saw that silhouette without asking anything, he took the carbine from the man and shot at that shadow several times. But it seemed that the bullets did nothing. Suddenly, that thing disappeared and fell back to the back of the store, followed by the dogs. They checked all around, but there was no one. The dogs smelled as if they were looking for something and sometimes barked, but they found nothing. 5 or 6 minutes later, they returned to the store without knowing what had really happened. Although the dogs stopped barking for a few minutes, they did it again. They growled very ugly and barked, supposing that whatever they saw was hidden there, but they didn't want to go out to look for it. As it was already late, with some precautions, my grandfather went back to his ranch in a pickup truck, and he went into a room he has there in the store. The next morning, when he came out to check all his things, he discovered that the dogs were dead. When he checked them, he realized that they had all sucked the blood out of them. They were dry. The strange thing he told us was that during that night, he did not hear anything. The dogs did not bark or cry, and there were no bloodstains anywhere. When he told the other ranchers, they said that a witch was flying from ranch to ranch in search of food. Some had already seen her on several occasions. They believed that what she was looking for were children to eat or people. But as it is not so easy to do so, because everyone was armed, she attacked the animals. He ended by saying that from that day to date, the witch continues to prowl around the area, especially when the nights are darker, which is why he suggested that I stay there that night. Because if I went walking in the dark of the forest, the witch could attack me, as she had already done so many times with the ranchers who had gone out at night. I know that in remote places like rural areas or ranches, paranormal manifestations are frequent, but I also knew that the stories of grandparents where the devil appears, as well as the presence of witches, are very common. Sure that nothing would happen, I got ready to leave because my grandparents were waiting for me, and I was already late. If I stayed longer, they would worry about me. In a good way, that gentleman offered me a horse, but I did not know how to ride. What I did accept was a gas lamp, because I didn't have a flashlight. He also offered me a gun. Maybe I might need it, but I didn't know how to use it either. So I respectfully said no. I didn't know how to use it. Wanting to help me, he told me that his compadre lived on a ranch near his, and he would surely lend me a donkey to get to my grandparents' ranch, because on foot it would be very difficult, even dangerous, because of so much mud and water. At his insistence, I agreed. When I left the tent, I knew what real darkness was, although I had been in the bush at night on other occasions. That day in particular seemed disturbing. I began to walk unsure towards the ranch where the gentleman sent me. Soon, I saw myself surrounded by bushes. I walked slowly along a muddy path because of the mud that was there. I never imagined to look at myself like that, in a night without moon, illuminating myself with that lamp that did little to help me. After 10 minutes, maybe I was halfway there, I had already regretted leaving the store, alone at that hour, but I was already there, in the middle of the bush walking towards an unknown ranch. Without the moonlight, the whole path seemed dark to me. With the little light I could see 2 or 3 meters. Maybe just that. Everything else around me, it was impossible to distinguish clearly. Although after a few minutes, I began to get used to walking in the dark. The tension and the nerves I had made me turn back constantly. That served to check that there was no one. I was alone in the bush. To make things worse, I realized that I heard strange noises. It was as if someone was following me. I did not want to stop to check. It could have been hares or small animals. I just tried to walk faster. Remembering what that man had told me about the witch, my mind began to imagine horrible things. I wondered how scary she could be and what my reaction would be when I saw her. Although with the darkness of a cloudy night, anything would scare me. For a long time, I walked along that sidewalk, always listening to different noises. I imagined things for so many nerves. The truth was that until that moment, I had only heard some noises. I had not seen anything paranormal. In the distance, in the middle of the mountain, I could distinguish a little light, and little by little, I could reach that ranch. With the barking of the dogs came out a man already in his old age, with a carbine in his hand and with a bad face. When he asked me what I was doing alone at night in those places, I explained to him who had sent me, what I needed, and who my grandfather was. After listening to me, he asked me to wait for him. Then he came back pulling a donkey. It was about 10 o'clock at night, but in the middle of the bush, it seemed like 3 o'clock in the morning. I got on the animal while he showed me the way to get to my grandfather's ranch, which was about 20 minutes away if I took a little traveled road crossing the creek by a bridge. Also suggested me to hurry the animal because that road was not very safe at night. After a few minutes, that ranch was lost in the darkness. There was only one path in the middle of all the bushes. I remember humming a song trying to control my nerves when in the middle of the darkness, I clearly heard that they were shouting at me. I became more nervous. I started to turn around without being able to distinguish anyone. About halfway down the path, I heard the sound of running water. Then I looked at a small bridge, which passed over a stream before arriving. The donkey stopped and no longer wanted to move. That started to give me a bad feeling. I hit him hard with my feet to make him walk. The donkey did not want to move. It seemed that he was afraid. I had no choice but to get off. Desperate, I grabbed him by the reins, so I walked across the bridge, pulling him even though he tried to stop several times when we finally managed to pass. That wooden bridge I got back on. Suddenly, the donkey seemed to be slapped. Someone that I was not able to see was hitting him. I could clearly hear the sound when they hit the donkey. As he was so scared, the animal knocked me down, running away, leaving me alone in the middle of the bush. On foot, to my misfortune, the lamp had broken in the fall. Now I would have to go to the ranch, walking and in the dark. I had no other choice. I had to follow the road even though it was taking forever. Even more so, because from time to time, I kept hearing clearly how someone who was very close to me was whispering to me. The worst thing that could have happened to me was to see a shadow hiding in some bushes. It made my blood run cold to think that the witch was following me, because it could not be that the donkey had turned back or came after me. I walked along that path, feeling lost in the middle of the night. No matter how hard I tried to recognize the way, it was impossible. Suddenly, I stopped in my tracks because I heard a little girl crying in the distance. My nerves quickly turned into fear because of the place and the time it was. It did not seem normal to me to hear something like that. I did not even want to know where that sound was coming from. But when I located it, I knew it was a few meters away, in front of me. As I got closer, I could hear the crying louder. When I was close enough, everything was in the most terrible silence, and I stopped again. I could not see anyone, but I knew it was there. I began to search in the darkness until I saw a girl dressed in black with long hair leaning on some bushes, stuck 1 or 2 meters in the bush. I asked her if she was lost. When she did not answer me, I asked her again. That girl turned to look at me, and when she did, I stepped back when I realized that she was not a girl. She was a horrible old woman who began to laugh in a frightening way. She had a huge face with wrinkled skin, big black eyes. I understood that she was the one who was following me. I got goosebumps when I realized that it was the witch. Instinctively, I ran aimlessly trying to get to safety. Although my legs didn't respond 100%, I moved as far away as I could from that place, while I kept hearing how she laughed louder and louder. I didn't know if it was because the witch was chasing me or because I wasn't really moving that fast. When I finally stopped listening to that horrible laughter, I felt safe. But when I wanted to go back to the sidewalk where I came from, I didn't see her. I looked for her desperately, and nothing. I knew I was lost. I was completely disoriented. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find my way. Maybe it was 11 or 12 o'clock at night. I couldn't wait for dawn to break, knowing that the witch was roaming around. Even worse, she was roaming around me. Then I started to hear her tell me, boy, come on, I'm not going to do anything to you. The fear made me start running again wherever I went without worrying if I got even deeper into the bush. For a long time, I ran desperately in the dark. asking God to find the way to my grandparents' ranch. All that time, the witch did not appear. Although I felt her presence, I knew she was in the bushes. I came to imagine that maybe she was waiting to see me tired, so I could not defend myself when it was time to attack me. Or maybe she was just playing with me. One or the other thing had my nerves on edge. Sometimes I remembered the man in the store when he offered me a weapon, because at that moment I really needed it. I thought he would have brought me a knife or a machete. Because of my refusal, I was now helpless at the witch's mercy. When I least expected it, I found the road. I was as happy as ever, although now the dilemma was to take the right path that would take me to my grandparents' ranch. Because if I made a mistake, I would return to the store and go all the way back. Risking my luck, I walked as fast as I could to my left, without any light, in the middle of the mud. Luckily, in less than 15 minutes, I saw my grandparents' ranch. At that time, they had 2 big dogs, which when I entered the land began to growl, very ugly, trying to get on top of me. When my grandparents came out, the dogs ran towards me, but they passed me. My grandfather, surprised, shouted, because I was arriving at that time. He also asked me who was coming with me. He assured me that he saw a shadow walking behind me, but he ran when he saw the dogs. We almost ran into his house, while we heard the dogs barking very loudly. After the scare, I started to tell them what happened, since I left the store until I got to his ranch. My grandparents were frightened by everything I told them. Finally, I asked my grandfather if it was true that he had shot the witch that night that the man told me. He told the same story, as I had heard it before, but also something else. I learned that when he was driving his truck to the ranch, he had a flat tire in the middle of the road, very close to the creek. By then, it was about 11 o'clock at night. It was too cold, so he hurried to change it. While he was doing it, he heard someone walking on the dry branches. Although he could never see anyone, he felt uneasy. When he finally finished, he opened the door of the van to get in, but he was about to do so when he felt someone grabbed him by the ankle. My grandfather thought he had gotten stuck on something, but when he turned to look at his foot, he realized something horrible. It was a black hand with big nails that had him by the ankle, trying to pull him under the truck. In El Monte. Horror story. With strength, he grabbed the steering wheel, even though those nails were digging more and more into his skin. He stretched his foot, trying to get out. He stretched until he succeeded. He locked himself in the truck. He was there waiting to see who would come out from underneath, but nothing happened. After a while, my grandfather heard how someone was hitting the truck from the bottom. It was moving very hard. He thought someone wanted to lift it. He also heard some horrible scratches. Still nervous, he started the truck and drove towards the ranch. With the headlights on, he could see a woman in black about 8 or 9 meters in front of him, practically flying across the road, getting lost in the darkness. All this had happened very close to there. Then he rolled up his pants and showed me the scars on his ankle. When I asked him why he had never told me, he smiled a little. I knew he didn't do it, so I wouldn't get scared. I understood that the witch thing was real. It was not a ghost or anyone imaginary. It was not a story. Many animals had died and some people disappeared over the years. My grandparents had been living with extreme care, but also with a lot of fear. When dawn came, my grandfather went out to feed the dogs, but none of them were there. He asked me to go with him to look for them in the bush, each one of us with machete in hand. We walked through the bushes talking and whistling at them, but they did not appear. After about 10 minutes, we found the first one. It seemed that he had been stabbed with a knife. His eyes were open and his tongue was out. Something strange was to realize that there were no traces of blood anywhere. When we found the second one, My grandfather was surprised. The poor dog had its eyes almost out, as if it had been crushed or worse. It looked as if it had been thrown from very high. Grandpa's conclusion was that the witch had lifted him up in the air, sucked the blood out of him, and then dropped him, because we didn't find any traces of blood around him either. We went back to the ranch. We left the dogs there. We went to get a shovel to bury them in the bush, so my grandmother wouldn't look at them. It took us maybe 25 minutes to get back. When we arrived at the place, the dogs were gone. We could not believe it. If an animal took them, it would have to be big, because the dogs were also big. Besides, it could be that one of them was taken, but neither of the two were there. For some minutes, we looked around without finding anything. On the way back to the ranch, my grandfather told me that they were not the first dogs that died in that strange way. There were about 10 of them alone, because in the other ranches, they had also killed many of them. Some of them were found mutilated. Other animals were missing all their legs. Only 2 of them were headless. Most of them were dry, not counting the dogs that had been missing for a long time. When she told me that not only dogs had been killed, but other animals, such as chickens, goats, and even cows were found dead, I became even more worried because my grandparents were already very old and lived alone. I tried to convince them to go live with us in the city because we would always live with them, but they never wanted to. Being on the ranch was their life. Many years went by. I went a couple more times. My grandfather never touched that subject. Out of respect, I never asked him if he really believed that the witch was the one who killed the dogs. When my grandparents died, at my insistence, my parents sold the ranch because they wanted to go and live there, or at least go on vacation. They did not care what they said about the witch, but I, who every day remembered what I lived, would not do such a thing, nor would I let my family do it. Thank you for joining us for this spine-tingling story. We hope you found it both thrilling and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed this video, please consider participating in our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with your friends. Your support goes a long way in helping us create more engaging content for you.